Welcome to the Anita CHAT podcast. I'm your host and coach, Anita Rombo. This is the podcast for growth-oriented, high-vibe, and big-hearted people who are ready to show up and glow up to be the best versions of themselves. If you are ready to embrace your most authentic, aligned, and abundant life, one that feels great on the inside and out, then you, my friend, are in good company. Grab your favorite bevy, settle in. We've got lots to chat about. Hi there, and welcome to another episode of Anita Chat. I hope you are doing well. Today, I am so incredibly excited to welcome Dr. Alessandra Wall to the chat again. Dr. Wall is no stranger to the chat. In fact, we had her on for the first season, and it was such an incredible and powerful episode. And Alessandra and I also just connect on a human level. I truly consider her to be a great friend and human. And so I'm just so excited to welcome you back, Alessandra. Welcome to the chat.
This is a wonderful way of spending part of an afternoon after a very long week. So thank you for having me back.
Oh, thank you. You're rescuing me from, I was just telling Alessandra that 2 out of the 4 of us have COVID right now. So I'm happily healthy and quarantining in my office. So this is a welcome diversion to the real life outside of this door. But Alessandra, for those of my listeners who don't know who you are, would you mind introducing us and telling us a little bit more about you?
Sure. Let me see. The most salient, most important thing your listeners could know about me is I am one of those people who's genuinely really interested in other people. I like asking questions. I like understanding how things go. And I pair that with an incredible and maybe pathological at time love for any kind of puzzle. And that translates into what I do professionally. So these days I spend most of my days, nearly every day when I'm not dealing with IT issues, working with women, executive leaders, usually in STEM and finance fields, but really fields that shape the way we operate as a human race and as societies. And our goal is to set them up to really be the best leaders they can be and to do it in a way that isn't going to exhaust them or have them build incredible success that is incredibly miserable.
So now you guys, listeners, will know why Alessandra's on our show, because this relates so much to a lot of the things that we talk about. We talk about energy, we talk about soulful success, which is finding and creating this life where personal fulfillment meets financial prosperity and that you feel aligned and authentic and abundant. And all of the people that listen into this show are high achieving goal getters, mostly women. So you are talking to the right people, and we're so excited to have you here today.
In full disclosure, like 2023 has been a really tough year, right? When women struggle, and in 2023, women have struggled, especially in the spaces tech, finance,
Yeah.
like in the spaces where I like operate very much so. So it's been, you and I had conversations about this. It's been really a year of slowing down, right? That is the first thing that I do. It used to be, for listeners who don't know me, I started my career as a clinical psychologist. And my area of specialty the last 10 years of my career were anxiety. So I very much practice what I preached when I was a clinical psychologist. So when things get scary for one reason or another, my go-to is to slow down. Like it's the number. My second go-to is to breathe and to relax my body so that my brain can start working. And then to really dig into what I know to be true, what I know is working, where the fear is coming from, and how to operate despite the fear in the short run, and in the long run, how to manage that fear. And so that is what this year has been like on many levels, and not just for me, but for nearly every woman I've spoken to.
I couldn't agree more. And you and I also share our love for psychology and our background in psychology. I'm also a therapist, although a different therapist, OT, occupational therapist in my past life. And similar to you, I felt the same vibe. And my word of the year for 2023 was ease. And I think as a perpetual go-getter, I just felt like I always needed to be on, big subscriber to like hustle culture and toxic productivity and part of that perfectionism persona that we carry. And so 2023, and actually way before that too, is just we're a work in progress, right? And it's really just about figuring out what's really working for us, what's serving us. And in that journey, I discovered I need to welcome more ease into my life. So that has been my mantra for the year. And then you mentioned another one. You said, what did you say? Relax. Step
Yeah,
three.
I mean,
Is
it's
that
my least
relax?
favorite word because relax is the thing people tell you when they when they don't want you to feel what you're feeling. Breathe.
Breathe. Okay. So, and like, I mean, a lifelong meditator and all that type of stuff. But what one of the words that you said cued me for my 2024 word, spoiler alert, that I haven't publicly declared yet, but I am now. And that is play. And so what I found is when I created all of this ease in my life, and I did it through automations and boundaries and, all that kind of stuff. And again, there's still lots of room to improve. But what I found was what I did with that newfound time was just do more of the same. So I didn't actually slow down as much as I wanted to. And so the last couple of months, I've really, really, and for me, it's my kids. I like make it about spending quality time with them, but really it's for me. It's the play piece. And so that's what I'm looking to do in 2024 is just, realize that it's okay to take a beat and like you can create time and space through ease, but you don't have to fill that space up again with more work. So that's where
Yeah.
I'm going. That's where I'm going.
It's interesting. I'm not even there for the 2024 intention, which sometimes is a single word and sometimes
Yeah.
is just a concept. I would say actually my 2015 or 2016 intention was repurposed for 2023. It wasn't what my initial intention was, but in 2015 or 2016, my intention was to act despite fear. And that whole year was about thinking bigger, dreaming bigger, taking steps without having contingency plans, because a contingency plan is an assumption of failure in advance of doing
Hmm.
something. And so that
I love that.
whole year, I did things that felt uncomfortable. And I challenged my inner perfectionist, who really started with like the assumption that trying is the first step to failing. So unless you know you're going to excel at something, you shouldn't even do it. That's how I used to operate. And then after 2015 or 2016, I like tried all these things, failed at many, didn't fail at others at all, and came out of that year going, I don't really care about failing anymore. Right. I wish I felt entirely confident that I could succeed at everything. That didn't happen. What I came out of that year with was really knowing how to identify the things I was afraid of and take the actions I would take if I were not afraid. That's where the act despite fear comes. And then work on the fears at a cognitive and emotional level in the background. So when I think of 2023, I did a lot of that, right? 2023 was looking at a year where we were supposed to hit record revenue. And then everybody got really scared about this recession, which technically still hasn't happened, although everybody's acting like it is, and companies certainly are, and watching the reaction and going, oh my goodness, like these things aren't developing the way we wanted them to develop. And like one of the first things I did is I was supposed to renew my license as a clinical psychologist. We have to do that every 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
And there are different statuses. So you can be active, that allows you to practice and call yourself a clinical psychologist. You can be inactive, there you're still in good standing. And anytime you want to reactivate, you just have to, pay the piper. And then you have retired. And this year I went into inactive because I'm like, I am not going to renew my license. That's a contingency plan. I'm just going to trust that this business that I've built for many, many years, but my license for the last 2 years has been like that blankie that you hold on to. It's been doing a lot of work that the scientist in me, the academic in me goes, oh, am I really? But like energy work, because I have a coach and she works with an energy coach and she's really big into this and going, I actually don't care how it works. Like, I don't care if it's energy from the universe or cognitively, I'm just regrouping and slowing down, or it's just breath work. I don't really care. It makes me feel more still. Right. And in being more still, then I can take these actions despite fear. It's a lot of conversations about worry and anxiety that I've been having with my clients and with other women who are not my clients, or just people I have the privilege of having, really delicate conversations with.
Mm-hmm.
And then really thinking of how I apply, like how I walk the talk. Right.
So beautiful. Can relate. As for me, I wouldn't try it if I couldn't excel in it. That was me in my corporate world, I think. I've always been that high achiever, dean's honors list, class presidents, and all that type of stuff. And so when I got restructured around the pandemic and started my journey as an entrepreneur, that is actually where I feel a lot of personal growth happened. I mean, I've always been a devotee of personal growth, and I've always been into all of that self-help spirituality. Like that's always been a part of me. But I feel like it really amped up in a whole different way that I could never have expected or anticipated or would have thought for myself, because it was so uncomfortable. And I felt like life as an entrepreneur every day is about taking risks and trusting the unknown, especially when you're starting out. There's a lot of everything is a new process that you have to figure out, right? You have to figure out your website, you have to figure out how to do like every single thing. And that's part of the beauty of it too, is it's like they're all just puzzles, and you have to figure out how to do this puzzle, and then figure out how that puzzle works with your vision and you. And it's a constant course correction, but every day there is this element of unknown to figure out. So it's both magical, but it's also, depending on the magnitude of it, can be pushing you way out of your comfort zone and creating a sense of anxiety. And when we talk about security blanket, I mean, for the last 20 some odd years, my security blanket was a corporate job. And I can tell you that when I was restructured and it was like my year of finding myself, and I decided I wanted to rebrand and I wanted to become an entrepreneur, I also took it upon myself to find myself more authentically, right? Like to create. And I think maybe actually, Alessandra, I'd be curious to see what you think of this. When we met last year, I'm definitely, I call myself a soul strategist and success coach. So I'm still about enabling success, but now I'm also leading a lot more into my spiritual being, which has always been a part of me. But again, corporate world, you saw a different persona. It wasn't something you talk about at the water cooler. I've been meditating since I was 7. It's just, these aren't things that I share about myself. If you know me in that capacity, then you know me. But now I'm coming out to the world not only as an entrepreneur, but as an entrepreneur that is about all of these things that I previously didn't share. And it was just felt like this really progressive unveiling as I get more and more comfortable with this new identity. But having said that, as I was saying, I kind of digress a bit, but that time that I was just in that entrepreneurial space, all I could do in my head was do this countdown. Oh, 9 months and 29 days until severance pay is done. Better hit the ground running. 9 months and 20. And it just, I needed that security blanket of a paycheck to make it work. And so, I do actually still have a day job. I went back to work. I took a contract role, not because I needed it financially so much, but because I needed it psychologically.
Mhm.
And so you're telling the contingency planning aspect of what you were saying was you don't bake in a contingency plan. It's funny because I am I am still a little bit relying on that, but I do have an end date in mind. And so that date is written down. That date is something that our family is working towards. And so I'm hoping that, again, as I grow and evolve as an entrepreneur, and in my courage, flexing those courage muscles, which I do in so many different ways every day, that I'll be able to move forward with that a contingency plan one day.
You know, the thing with human beings is we're all different, right? So for me, the contingency plan it was holding me back, because for me, it was the rationalization for failure, right? And I didn't realize it again until 2015 was a really pivotal year for me, which is why I think it might have been my intention for 2016. But it it I thought I was so bold. I was doing all these things that were so bold. I was already doing things that were scaring me. I didn't realize until after a while, I'm like, oh, all this stuff that I call planning, it's actually not planning. It's just softening the blow of potential failure. But for
Ooh,
some other
I love that.
people, it's planning or it's being realistic, right? I certainly practiced as a therapist for nearly 10 years while I was still coaching in order to get to a point where I could build a company that generated enough revenue where then I could step away. Right. So I'm at a point where I'm looking at that revenue building over the last several years and going, why am I still holding on to this? Oh, that's what it is. It's my blankie. It's that part of me that's still giving into the be careful, you might fail still. And like, there's no reason to believe that. Actually, I'm far more, from a revenue perspective, do far better as a coach than I ever did as a therapist. But things are scary right now. The economy is scary. Everything's kind of in the air. I've been doing a lot of work this end of year with women in bio. And the biotech space right now is blowing up, and not in the good kind of way, like kind of just companies are slashing 30, 40% of their workforce, which there are a lot of questions and a lot of debates. And I have too much anger around this right now to have an intelligent conversation about it, just to be honest. But what we're seeing is, it's not just me. There's so much fear and anxiety present in people. And because anxiety was my area of specialty as a clinical psychologist, it's easy for me at this point to look at it and to look at what people are going through. And it's a natural process to walk in and go, okay, well, let's figure out, like, what do we need to do with this? But it's also very important to turn that mirror back on oneself. Go, what am I doing? Like, what is keeping me up at night? And you think, I can't remember if you and I talked about this, but I love talking about it because I don't think enough people talk about it. I'm 46.
Me too.
And I'm premenopausal.
Me too.
I met a 53-year-old woman yesterday who's like, I don't know.
I just had the most epic hot flash 2 minutes ago.
I'm like, how did you do that? So I was up at 4 this morning. My bad for not taking my progestin pill last night. And I laid in bed till about 4:50. And then at 4:50, I'm like, screw it. I'm just going to get up. The house is calm and quiet. We celebrate Christmas in my household. So I'm like, I'm going to turn on the lights on the Christmas tree, make coffee, hope that nobody else wakes up, and enjoy this moment of like silence in the blanket of darkness, which I was able to until about 6. But it's really important to look at, like, am I up at 4 and not able to fall asleep because of hormones? That was this morning. Or am I up at 4 and not able to fall asleep because of anxiety? Right. And that might have been last time that happened a few weeks ago. And then when you have that, what are you going to do with it?
But I think also on this note, because I'm 46, just turned that anyways, had an epic hot flash just like 2 minutes ago while you were talking. And I just was like, oh my God, I want to peel back layers if I can. How do you know if it's the hormones? Because the hormones do impact our sleep versus anxiety. Is there a way to tell?
Yeah.
Aren't they related? Like, don't
well, they are. So here's the thing. First of all, if you're in your 20s or 30s and you're listening to this, it still applies to you. Because in the media, when I used to think of women going through menopause, I pictured little gray-haired ladies. Now my hair is graying. This right here is not blonde, it's gray, and I'm not going to dye it. I'm just letting it get more and more gray. But I'm 46. Like, I can scale a wall, I can do pull-ups, I can run and do things. I still like to dance my butt off in nightclubs, and I picked up surfing 2 years ago. Like, not a little old lady going around like all dried up. And when I'll be that age, I will not be a little old lady all dried up either. So to anybody who's listening, who's in their 70s and 80s, you're fabulous, right? But as you're listening to this, it really is more of a conversation about, especially as women, how much our hormones impact how we navigate the world and how we perceive the world. So when we're talking about being premenopausal, it's also a little bit like, for some women, they experience the same thing around their period, but certainly for some women, they experience the same thing around pregnancy, where this surge or this imbalance in hormones can drive anxiety. So sometimes even the anxiety that you're feeling, it's hormonal. And when you correct those hormones, when you get past your PMS or your post MS, or when you get past pregnancy, or when you get past or you get hormone patches to deal with hormonal things, you're like, oh, I feel so much better. That thing I was worrying about, I just really, it was fine. Right. So I do agree. But I would start with, especially for women who are premenopausal, you can look at, do I wake up and am I filled with anxiety, like that panic? Or do I wake up at 4 a.m. and is my mind kind of running because I'm up, but it's not churning? You know, the way it feels when your mind is churning. That's one of the distinctions. And then sometimes, even when I realize my mind is churning and running, where literally I wake up and you can feel like the adrenaline just coursing through your body, like the anxiety is that palpable. Even in those moments, I have to look at or consider at this stage in my life that part of it might be hormonally driven. The difference is this: in both cases, if I'm waking up and I'm feeling anxiety, there's work I can do to manage that anxiety at a cognitive level and at a physical level, both of which will allow me to address it at a emotional level. Whereas if I'm waking up at 4 a.m. just because my hormones have me waking up at 4 a.m., but I'm pretty calm, I will do what I did this morning, which is lie in bed full 50 minutes and then go, okay, well, like, let's just get my day started. I don't need to do anxiety management work. I just drink my coffee in peace and enjoy life.
I'm using this time to my advantage because I too am waking up extra early. I've always been a morning person, so this extra early is extra early. And it's been lovely because I wake up and I do my meditation practice and I get about an hour and a half of book writing in before the house starts to move. And I'm done for the day. Like, I've met my threshold. And if I don't get back to it because the day takes over, I feel pretty good. So my productivity levels are through the roof. So I would say that that's one positive piece of this. But back to the topic, we're talking about anxiety. We're talking about so much fear being pervasive everywhere. You particularly work with high achieving women in the STEM biotech fields. I work with high achieving women, not necessarily specific to those fields, I would say, but just like high achieving corporate women, a lot actually of entrepreneurs or aspiring entrepreneurs. And there's a lot of fear and anxiety there too. So it's interesting whether you're in the working world 9 to 5 or whether you're trying to carve your own path. There is a ton of anxiety. That's the common element that unites all of these groups of high achieving, big dreaming women. I want to talk about how we can transmute that fear. That's very natural because there's a landscape of unknowns that we're all contending with. How can we transmute that into an energy that isn't so anxiety provoking, maybe excitement, even if we want to really take it to the whole next level of, looking forward to a new chapter instead of begrudging and waiting for that shoe to drop and wondering what we're going to do. Do you think we can go there a little bit? I think that would be really fun to explore.
Yeah, I'm actually really interested in the use of the term transmuting. So I'm going to let you take that piece. I talk about the piece of it has to do with recognizing and addressing anxiety at a cognitive level.
Yes.
So
and so I'm woo, but I'm also logical, right? So there's a little bit of both that comes into my work. But go ahead. Sorry, I interrupted you.
Well, you know what? That probably really is part of what makes your work so powerful, right? Because you can balance that right and left brain approach to these things. And I do in my own way. What I mostly try to do is to not, I recognize again what I said earlier with the energy work, like I don't really care how it works. All I care is if it works. Because here's the thing, a placebo effect is still an effect. Don't care.
Yeah.
Right? Like if that's a sugar pill and it's making me feel whatever, I think like a medication's, but it's making me feel it because the mind is such a powerful, your brain is so ridiculously powerful. Absolutely. And we are very quick to acknowledge how powerfully our brain can make us spiral out. And we are very slow to acknowledge or to want to invest time and energy into using that same power to get us out of a spiral, right? People so easily look at, oh yeah, well, of course, this person has anxiety. This is happening because I'm thinking my way through it. And then you'll talk to them about, you can unthink that. And they're
I
like,
think those labels
I'm
sometimes
so
harm us too,
optimistic.
right?
That's so easy. It's so simple. Like they will dismiss that the brain can operate just as powerfully in the other direction.
And that's the power of labels. Labels are helpful because if we need to get support, say medically or pharmacologically, it helps to address something, or it helps to have a root cause or to understand a condition. But sometimes it's also self-limiting, right? So as a therapist, when I worked with MBA people that were injured in car accidents, so in the MBA field, or a lot of the clients I would see, if I was coming in from the insurance side, like my job was to always be objective no matter what, right? So to review the file, review the patient, and to really provide a neutral assessment of what I saw. But if they had a lawyer on file, I would find that they were really not as coachable in terms of getting rehabilitated back to wellness. They had really espoused themselves to feel that they're much more limited. Their therapy plan was 10 times longer, and their list of restrictions was just as big. And it was this cycle of learned helplessness. And so sometimes I think labels can promote that as well. So we have to be very careful. It's helpful, but also harmful if we rely on them as a crutch to say why we can't change, or why, they can create a culture of uncoachability, for lack of a better word.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. I completely agree. And that's where I think having a growth mindset is really helpful, because somebody can throw a label at you. And if you have a fixed mindset, then you're like, oh, well, this is what is, right? The economy sucks. I have anxiety, or I have this issue, and then I'm stuck. It defines me. Everything about this defines me. But in a growth mindset, the idea is to come in and look at that and go, okay, so this is a factor. It's a stable factor. It's a constant in this equation for now. What do I want to do with that constant?
Mm-hmm. And that's
Is
where I
there
think coaches,
right? Are there
that's our
ways to
superpower.
overcome or switch the
Yeah.
constant? Or if it's a constant, can I factor it in? And what else can I do? What are the workarounds? What are the other factors I need to bring in to achieve what I wanted to achieve, or something as close as that as possible to that? And I completely agree with you. That is part of what we get to do as coaches. And if you're ever working with a coach, dear listener, doesn't help you think through how to get to where you want to go despite whatever you're facing, like that is not a coach who's working for you.
Yeah, I would agree. I think that's also where our love for psychology and our reliance on our past training really primes us well to support the reframing. And of course our objectivity, right? Like our ability to not be in that situation and be far removed and really observe how the outside influences are melding with the internal events of
Yep.
who we are, the internal makeup, right? Some people I find are just more primed to think in a certain way and react in a certain way. Some people, prefer to like kind of sit in it for a little bit until they get to that point where it's just so uncomfortable that they can't. And then they come to you because they're this like kind of last ditch attempt to like, please help me. Like I've been in here too long and I can't see my way out. And you're kind of the wayfinder in helping them navigate to a more elevated level of themselves. Right.
Yeah, that's exactly why the term Sherpa was overused for so much time, like in the
Really?
20 around the 2010s, 2012s, like people were like, I'm a Sherpa this, but that's why, right? This is
I
this
never
whole
heard that.
image that you used. Oh yes,
Interesting.
like guru, Sherpa, ninja, and maven were the words that were really overused to
So
talk
I know
about.
guru because that's an Indian word. So I'm like, oh yeah, I get that. But Sherpa, interesting. Never knew that.
Right, but it's
You're
that
teaching me.
analogy of helping you
Yeah.
navigate the path and the way to get to higher elevations, right?
And so
So
to me, that's the transmuting piece, right? It's the like, how do we, the energy is going to be there. Like that energy of fear is going to be there. There's this whole law of thermodynamics, right? Where you can't create or
mhm.
destroy energy. You can only transmute it. So going through the spectrum of different kind of emotions that we feel, can we reframe the situation to be one that's a lot more positive and one that's working for us rather than against us, right? When we're in a fear-based energy, we're limiting ourselves, we're shutting ourselves down, we're contracting, right? Like, can we get into like a more expansive, can we face our challenges, because life is all about challenges? Can we be more resilient in the way we face them, and can we be more adaptable, and can we be more curious about what's coming up versus being scared?
Well,
um
and we've teased your listeners so much over the last 5 to 7 minutes with this like concept of transmutation and reframing. We haven't provided them the reframes.
Okay, let's
So
do it.
I want to bring us back for a second, because I'm thinking, man, if I were listening to this going, I'm anxious, I'm trying to figure out how to do it. And we're talking about why this matters and why it's so important. And then they're like, yes, but what am I supposed to do? And I'm actually really interested in hearing what your thoughts are about what I'm about to say, and then how we would use that to move people into excitement, and whether it's possible to move people into excitement in all situations. That here's how I approach anxiety and fear with myself first and foremost, and then with my clients. I remind people that anytime you are feeling anxious about something, whatever it is you're anxious about actually hasn't happened. That is a really important thing. If I'm sitting here and I'm worrying about, like, what if I get laid off, and what if this happens, and what if I can't handle, or maybe 40% of my team just got laid off and I suddenly have to carry their workload. Like, what if I can't? What if this breaks? What if my company goes under? What I'm doing is I'm fortune telling. I am casting into the future, focusing on the worst case scenario, right? I'm not sitting here and going, what if I don't get laid off and suddenly my company is able to pull in the investments that they need? What if I manage this whole workload like a boss, figure out how to make things more efficient, and I pull my company out of a recessionary mindset? Like, that's not where anybody goes with the what ifs. But if you can remind yourself, first and foremost, that thing you're so afraid of, where in your mind, as you worry, you operate as if it had happened or were happening, it hasn't happened. So that is your first place, your first opportunity to calm yourself down and reassure yourself. It's the second you're like, yeah, but what if this happens? It's like, oh, but it hasn't happened. I'm okay right now. I'm totally okay right now, because that thing, fantasy, right?
So
So
in the woo language, it's grounding yourself in the present, right?
yep.
And it's also attracting. So we're talking about manifestation and the power of energy, creating like energy, right? So the fortune telling, if we're getting into that negative spiral, we're actually attracting those things to us, versus if we're thinking, that you're going to kill it in a great way, that's attracting that energy, the big boss energy that comes through.
Right. And I would say grounding, actually, we use all the time in psychology, and we
Yeah,
use mindfulness, and we use with
absolutely.
DBT stuff, right? And it is really about, and Zen, right? All that work. So it is about being in the here and now. And so that takes me to my second strategy. So the second strategy is, if I wake up in the middle of the night and I start thinking, like, well, what if things go here, and what if this revenue doesn't come in, and what if these people, we had all these potential corporate opportunities, but what if, like, the market doesn't pick up, and what if these companies now can't afford it? And just stop and go, hey, what is right now is none of that's happened.
Mm-hmm.
What is right now is that things are fine. This is where I'm at. Right. And so moving the second active process of dealing with that fear beyond realizing, oh, wait, I'm fantasizing, right? None of that is then doing that grounding work you're talking about. And the grounding work, for anybody, if you're a cognitive, like, mind processor,
Logical. Yeah.
right, it's telling yourself that you need to ground yourself in what you know to be true versus what might be. And then you can just sit and catalog, even if you're a note taker or list maker, what you know to be true. Like, what I know to be true is, in the example I gave, right? We have been actively building our networks and our relationships. We have a ton of conversations going there. This operates. I have used this a lot this year of going, I've been through 2008 and the 2009, and that whole, like, implosion of space. And it did affect the business I had at the time. And if you just chug along and you have the right processes, like, we got through it, and then we thrived after it, right? Or even reminding myself, like, even in a bad year, it's still, in absolute terms, a pretty damn good year, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that is grounding myself in what I know to be true, because as a problem solver, eventually I want to use that data, those facts, to potentially create a plan. And I'm going to say one more thing about the planning. The other thing that happens when people get really anxious is they like to worry. And yes, I said they like to worry, because the human brain confuses worrying with planning and somehow seems to believe that it has like the ability, like Professor X, to control things with the mind. So maybe if I worry about it enough, I can make it not happen. But worry is a false friend, because worry is actually not at all active as a process. Worry puts you in that space where you are fantasizing about the worst case scenario that hasn't even happened. So the difference between worry and planning is, if I look at a potential future event, which is what anxiety is about, and I determine that the potential of that future event, the probability, is high, then I will choose to not just try to stop myself from going there, but rather say, I actually really need to create some kind of plan, because the likelihood that this could happen is high enough, and I don't want to be taken, like by surprise. Once you create the plan based on what is here and now, the next thing you have to do is identify what will trigger you to put the plan in action. So really looking at, I don't need to like run with this plan until the following things happen. And once you're clear about what those triggers are, then you can stop worrying. And you can stop, like, your plan is done. So every time you worry, you can remind yourself, I don't need to worry. Has one of those triggers have those triggers taken place in my environment? And if the answer is no, then I'm good. Like, everything's good. But what if? What is? What is right now is, I identified when I need to really start moving into my action plan, and I don't need to do it right now. And if those triggers are there, well, I have a plan. And once we take action, we don't feel fear. Anybody who's been on this call, who's ever been in a car accident or who's faced like true life danger, knows you're afraid before, you're afraid after, but in the moment, when you are handling the danger, there is no fear. I've been held up at gunpoint when, like, before there was a moment of anticipation, after there was a lot of what ifs, like, what if this had happened? What if this? During, cool as a cucumber. And that is a pretty typical thing. You talk about people, I used to do parkour, anticipation before a big jump, but as you're jumping, you're not sitting there scared, you're jumping, you're in action, you're fine. And then after, you might look at the jump you just made, or the wall you just scaled, or how tall, how high you got into a space. And then you're like, oh, whoa, fear. After, never while you're taking action.
I really believe in soulful success. So to me, that's the intersection between science, strategy, and spirituality. So we're talking the same language when it comes to the science and the strategy piece. And I see that you're more open to the energy work. And so whether it's the placebo effect or whatnot, like, there's an openness there for you, right? It's for the spiritually curious, I think. But to me, the whole point of that spiritual piece is, especially if you are very logical, is the need to know the how. Right. That's like where we trip ourselves up and sometimes stop ourselves from taking action because we don't know the next step or we don't know the path forward. But I think that's the beauty of the journey. And that's also the beauty in dealing with anxiety, is the fact that you don't actually need to know the how. You don't really need to know the next step. You just need to take the step that you see. And then the next step will follow, and the next step will follow. And I find that, like, those that are very logical like to have a clear path. I'm one of them. And so it's been like a little bit of a dance, right? To kind of figure out how much ambiguity am I comfortable with? And then with time, kind of letting myself feel the comfort with seeing less and feeling more through my journey. Does that make sense?
It does. I was going to say, I found that what helps people a lot is understanding what is happening. And I don't like why, but fundamentally why. Like, why am I feeling this way? Why is this going on? What is the process? That for very logical people, for people like me, it's so helpful. I've had people go, oh, now when I used to work with folks who are dealing with anxiety and panic attacks, who go, now I know that when those pangs, those butterflies, like, that's surges of adrenaline. So I don't panic as much when I feel them because I know that you told me that's adrenaline. And you told me if I wanted to go jog, I could run that off. I could burn off that adrenaline, which they could. I know now that when my fingers and toes get really cold, that's vasoconstriction. I know that that's why my mouth gets dry when I'm anxious, because your body shuts down the digestive system, and salivation is the first step in digestion. Or when I feel this, like the world is getting disconnected, these are these processes. So understanding it. But you were talking about knowing the next step, and I agree with you. Like, part of it is just knowing that each step you take is going to take you somewhere closer to where you want to be. And the other thing that what you said really like triggered oh yeah, and this too moment was also understanding that just because you know all the right things to do doesn't mean they're going to work immediately. So because I have suffered through panic attacks, because I am naturally an anxious person, I thought it was really helpful for my patients because I can tell you all the things that I know work. I don't know that they work because they're in books or somebody did studies, although that helps. There's empirical evidence that these things work. I know that they work because I've watched them work with literally hundreds. Right? If I look at my medical charts, I just need to look at the number on it, like nearly 1,000 plus patients that I worked with.
Yeah, same.
But I also know that they work because I've tried all of them myself, going back to something you said. And I still know that there are days where, despite recognizing cognitively, this is just a fantasy, Alessandra, you're fine right now, despite grounding myself, despite doing breath work, despite giving myself grace, which is really like that anxiety monster, it's not going away. I will operate with this massive fear. With that fear, there's all the biological process, the cortisol, the adrenaline, like all of that stuff on top of everything else, just fueling it. But understanding what it is, recognizing what it is, means that in those moments, I can go, today I need to slow down a little bit. I'm not going to get as much done. I need to choose what kind of work I'm going to do because cognitively, mentally, I'm distracted, right? And my brain has to work between what I'm doing, what I'm fearing, and managing that fear. And then this too shall pass. And I used to tell that to my patients. I'm like, sometimes you just hit a 72-hour period where you wake up, you go to sleep, you feel anxious. You're constantly having like many thoughts in your head. None of them are logical. You know how to approach them. And doing all the right things isn't working right now. But if you didn't do those right things, instead of it being 72 hours, it might be 72 days. If you didn't do those things, you would be deepening the grooves of that dynamic and that cycle, so that next time you feel anxious or next time something happens, it's easier for anxiety to come in and to find its path and to like. So that's the other thing for your listeners. It's realizing, everything we're talking about, it works. And just because it works doesn't mean it's going to work immediately. And even sometimes you're going to do all the right things. And despite doing all the right things, you're not going to be able to shake the feeling. And for me, the most important thing you can do in those days is ask yourself, if I weren't feeling anxious, how would I approach my workday, these problems, this question, this issue? And can I act? That's where acting despite fear comes in. Can I act the way logically I know I should be acting? Right? Can I take the steps I know I need to take, despite in my brain something going, no, take the anxious route, right? Like, just recognize I can feel anxious, but act logical. So I'm not talking about faking, like pretending that you're not anxious. I just mean making the choices that would go with a non-anxious mindset. And then you can embrace the fact that you're having like one of those days.
Yep. So similar. I actually feel like we're dressing our people, the people that we serve similarly. And I think there's just a couple of nuances in terms of the language that we use. Our psych background is a very strong bridge, right? Like the presence, the grounding work, that's fundamental to both spirituality as well as psychology, right? So I think that's what's kind of bringing that science and that spirituality together. And it's beautiful to see.
Nature, by the way, a ton.
Oh
Like
God,
that's my
yeah.
grounding thing. Like I will go
Me
out, I
too.
will do breath work, tons of breath work, and I will go sit and do nothing. And that is, the science of awe really looks at like what you can use to ground yourself as a human being. And what we know about situations that produce a sense of awe is they do one of two things. Well, one of three things for humans. One is they make us feel small, but in making us feel small and in making the universe feel big, they give us a sense of connection. That's the second thing. And the third thing is they often are accompanied by an increase in spirituality, right? The sense that there must be on top of the world, the ocean, the sky, like something bigger. And that is where I see a lot of this grounding. And again, or this common ground between,
Mm-hmm.
Again, it doesn't matter what approach you take. All
As long
that's what's beautiful is that at the end of the day, they're not 5,000 different ways of doing something. They're just a few approaches. And then there are different ways, like there are different routes to get to the same destination, and finding the right route for you or finding the right person who's aligned with your route really makes all the difference.
one thing I think about when you mention this is I think about the solar system and just the gravitational forces and how there's all these planets in orbit, and if that exists, surely I can ask somebody, like I just give it over to the universe or whoever you want to call, whatever the higher power you believe in, but like surely this is not a big deal. Like if there's some sort of magnetic, like I don't know, if the universe can like magically orbit and I'm not falling all over the place, just there's this can be handled. This is like so teeny in comparison to like, somebody or something overlooking all of that, making all of that happen. Surely this meeting is going to go fine, or I'll figure my way out through X, right? Whatever it
Yeah.
is.
Or it's not.
Or
And
it's not,
I'll still be
but
fine, right? Like
yeah, there's
this
just
meeting
such
might
bigger
not go
things.
well
Yeah.
and it might feel terrible. But chances are 5 years from now, none of it will matter. Right.
I
So
used
how
that
do
just
I in the
yesterday.
moment handle this, like this moment, which feels scary or difficult or hard, and honor that, right? Not dismiss our own
Yeah.
emotions or our own experiences. But you said walk through it, like handle it, knowing that as bad as this feels right now, 5 years from now, for the vast majority of experiences, right? We're not looking at outlier experiences here. For the vast majority of experiences, none of it will really matter. It will be one of many things that I can look back on either as neutral or as an opportunity for growth. And I don't know if I'm capable of mustering excitement in those moments. I do know people who can, but I do certainly think that is where there's a potential for excitement. I have used 2023 as a year to go, I am going to look at all these challenges as opportunities for growth. And I'm going to really focus on, instead of going, oh, this year I've had to had so many sales conversations with people who like they just weren't and they didn't want to, and then go, this year has actually been really cool because it's a year where I've really learned to understand what scares all kinds of people and what keeps us from moving forward or what might motivate us to take actions that feel difficult. And so whatever skills I've developed this year, when the world is a little bit calmer, when people feel a little bit safer, these will all help me be so much more effective at helping the right women access the right help and support so that they can make the difference in the world that I need them to make, which is ultimately
For
why I do
sure.
what I do.
For
Right?
sure. And you just did the reframe. You
Mhm.
just did the reframe. You applied the reframe and you found the excitement, right? Like the learning, the lessons, the curiosity, and how that's going to serve you later. And similarly, when you're talking, you just reminded me. So yesterday, I used that exact same in 5 years. No one's going to remember this. I had something pre-booked in my schedule. It was a pretty huge opportunity, and I also had time allocated to prepare for it. And when push came to shove, two of my four family members down with COVID. I'm, doing it all, really tired. Just I didn't feel as prepared as I wanted to going in. And my buffer, the time that I had allocated, just quickly got eaten up. So I showed up and I acted as if I dressed the way I was going to dress. I created all the artifacts I was going to do. I delivered. Did I have all those hours of extra practice and delivery time and all that type of stuff? No, I didn't. But guess what? I said, you know what? I'm just going to do my best. Just going to do my best. And 5 years from now, even tomorrow, the people that I'm serving, they're not going to remember this if I screw up. They don't even know what a screw up looks like because they don't know what I'm planning to deliver. I did just fine. I actually did amazing. But my point is that's how I got through it was I just reframed for myself, took that expectation off myself to say, hey, just show up, just act as if you had all the time in the world. You're ready to do this. You're going to do this. You're going to learn from it. Stay curious, stay open, enjoy it. And a previous evolution of me would have been like, I'm not ready. And the perfectionist churn of, trying to control the situation and really creating a lot of anxiety over the fact that things would not be ready to my standard. But to be honest, I couldn't have delivered it better even if I had 10 more hours to prepare or whatever it was. It was just a mental feeling of not being prepared. But sometimes you just need to take the plunge and act as if and get through it and give yourself grace, knowing if it doesn't go perfectly, it doesn't go perfectly. But, it may or may not. Who knows? Nobody can predict those kinds of outcomes, but we can show up, as our highest and best and feel good about the outcome no matter what.
Well, and I might use that, what you're talking about perfection nearly as a way to wrap this all up in a bow with this thought that I think in my experience, what causes a lot of anxiety, especially for women, is the assumption that we need to do things perfectly. And that is as delusional, right? We assume that we're capable of doing things perfectly. B, we assume that is what is expected of us. And C, we assume that if we cannot deliver that perfection, terrible things will happen. But if we can function in this imperfect space, and if we can trust for a second that our good enough is great, a lot of the stress that we put upon ourselves will go away. And your story is full proof of that, right? Like at the end of the day, you felt like you needed a ton of preparation because you were trying to aim for even better than whatever you had. The reality was clearly you had the expertise, you had the knowledge, you had an understanding of whoever your audience was at this opportunity to deliver something with the real value and with just enough or the right level of polish and professionality that it was fine, right? And all that time and energy you probably invested in worrying right before that, what if I screw up? What if this doesn't go? What if I don't look professional? Like all of that was such a waste because you always had it in you. Like your good enough is great.
Mm-hmm. We should just end right there because that's beautiful. Sometimes B work or B plus work is you don't have to strive for A all the time, right? You don't.
Well, and sometimes your B plus is actually most people's A. That's
with totally.
That's the other thing I discovered. It's like we tell ourselves that that's the problem, like that an A is a B plus because we're striving for perfection. I'm like, it's really great. I mean, it's not like it's just good enough. I'm like,
and who's giving out those
good
grades?
Enough, like solid. This is awesome work.
And who's giving out those grades? Who's the judge of whether it's an A or a B or a C? It's us, right? We're our most harshest critics. So Alessandra, I know we gotta wrap this up, but this was really lovely to connect with you again. Thank you so much for joining us today on the chat. I really hope that you'll come back on again soon so that we can have some more real talk. I love you. Take care.
So thank you.
Thank you. Bye for now.